Hello, and welcome to Self-Care is Sexy. My name is Chris, and I'll be your host. We're a weekly podcast that's here to generate and share self-care ideas with each other. Last week, I went through a list of 20 subtle self-care ideas that were not your typical run-of-the-mill ideas that you find off of Instagram or inspirational memes. We went a little bit deeper. If you missed that episode, you can always check us out on iTunes, Spotify, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Spreaker, Podbean, PodNation, iHeartRadio, and of course at our website at www.selfcareissexy.com. All right, so for today, we're going to be talking about self-care in the sense of when is it appropriate and how do we determine when we're setting a healthy boundary and when we're using self-care as an excuse. And I feel like the best way to get this ball rolling today is to give an example. But first, if you are new to this show, if this is your first time listening to Self-Care is Sexy, first of all, I want you to take a special beat, a moment, congratulate yourself, and celebrate the fact that you took the time out, you found this show, and you're pumping yourself full of positive energy and attitude and inspirational messages about taking care of yourself. That is huge. That means you're starting to recognize that, hey, you matter, you're worth taking the time, and you deserve a little bit of that good investment into bettering yourself. And so make sure that you don't just run over the fact that you found the show and you're listening. That's so super important. It's huge. Because today's show is about self-accountability and about how to make sure that you are more centered with your self-care and not being self-centered. There's such a huge difference. Now, if you've already listened to my show and you've been on board with me for a while now, you already have that foundation, that knowing that self-care is so important and that it's okay to be a priority and to put yourself first. And I know that it's really important for us to remember that most of us aren't using self-care as an excuse to get out of stuff. That is not the majority of the listeners of this show. But it's still really important for us to talk about it and be aware of it. Because perhaps you don't do it, but maybe there are other people in your life that you've noticed this pattern of the excuse of not following through because they've got to take care of themselves. And we're going to give you some coaching tips on how to approach that in the right way. Now, first of all, if you do tend to encounter people that are using self-care as the justification or the excuse not to do what they've said they're going to do, it's really important to call it out. So that's super key. The best way to start this out is with an example. So let's say, I love using the example of moving because it seems to happen like at least once a month in my life. Somebody's moving and they need help. They put a call out on social media or, hey, are you available next week and I need help moving. And you commit to it, say, yeah, sure. Maybe at the time that they ask you, and this is super key, friends. I really want us to pay attention to this. At the point of being asked to help, and remember, we've talked about this in past shows. When you're learning to develop your self-care muscle, when you're really first starting to develop that self-love, that self-compassion, you really have to be diligent about not offering up help. Because we're kind of detoxifying ourselves from that immediate knee-jerk reaction of always wanting to be Captain Save-'em and overextending ourselves. We've talked about this multiple shows. And instead, waiting for people to approach us and ask us for help. That's a major key. You wait to be asked for help. If you have a hard time making self-care a priority, you really have to be diligent about this. But when somebody asks for help, and you say, yes, I can help you, and you commit to that, and then the day of the move, you're like, oh, I really can't. I've had such a hectic week. I'm so tired. I need to just focus on me today. That is a huge difference between setting the boundary and being like, nope, I can't help you move. Now, another point I want to bring up is like, what if you get to the move date and you genuinely are like burnt out and tired? Are you not allowed to say no because you want to be a good moral person who follows through? Or is there a little bit of leeway and some gray space? And that's what we're talking about today. The difference between the two, and that you're operating from that point of, You do what you say you're going to do. You follow through, but you also have badass boundaries. And that's important. And this is a balance. There's not a right and wrong answer. You have to know inside yourself. That's where the accountability, the self-accountability comes from. You need to know, and you do know. I believe we know when we're doing the right thing. And if you don't know, and you can't tell if that's you or not, the biggest tip off, and this again, if you're taking notes, my friends, this I would write down for a test. If you experience a lot of shame, if you are ashamed a lot of the time, it's because your mind knows, your soul knows inside of itself if you're not doing esteemable things, if you're not being loving and genuine and authentic, your soul knows. And so if you're experiencing a lot of the negative fear and self-loathing that comes from shame, you really want to start watching how often you do this. But if it's something that you recognize you're doing, using that excuse like, I really need to take care of myself, let's just pause for a second and just let's spill the damn tea. Let's get to the point. First of all, it's always okay to say no to a request. It is not, however, okay to commit to something and then bail using self-care as the reason or the justification. And if that is a mind-boggling concept to you, listen to episode 5 on saying no. Because saying no is so incredibly powerful, and it's an extremely useful act of self-care. We've talked about it on the show before about micro acts of self-care. That not every act of self-care has to be this over elaborate, expensive, massive day spa treatment. It is also the little things we do to ourselves, good or bad, that really determine if we are being loving to ourselves, having self-compassion and forgiveness. So if you're like, yikes, this sounds like me, what do I do? Sit tight, I've got you. We'll get to that in a second. But I really want to focus right now on what are some of those common excuses that people come up with or that you might be coming up with as a justification. And the reason I want to give you these examples is so that you can start to look for it. So when you're going through your week and you're doing your thing this week and you're thinking about self-care, I want you to, when you hear these following excuses, whether you're giving them or you're receiving them from others, I want a little light bulb to go off in your head and think immediately about the excuse and what we're talking about today. So the first excuse, the number one excuse people use to get out of anything is, I'm so tired. It's my personal favorite excuse, Only, honestly, no one ever actually uses that as an excuse, right? They replace it with some different type of an excuse. But if you find yourself saying, I can't, I'm tired, or if you hear someone saying, I can't, I'm tired, I want you to really think about what that means a little bit deeper. Because most people only say the bare minimum unless you have a really connected relationship with them and you can pull the good, juicy stuff out. What that surface thing is trying to say is, I don't manage my time well. I'm not taking care of my sleep. And it's important that you, as receiving that excuse, understand that. So if you've got a friend of yours that you're always like, hey, let's go do this thing, or I need your help with this, and they're constantly, I'm so tired, I can't, I'm tired, I don't want to. It gives you more empathy and compassion to their situation to understand, like, oh, they don't respect themselves enough to get good sleep. They're not respecting themselves good enough to manage their time better. Because this is an excuse that presents itself all the time. Another excuse is, it's too hard, it's too difficult. I can't do this because it's just too much work, right? So if you find yourself using that excuse, you have to really listen to what you're actually saying about yourself when you use this excuse, or if someone's using it on you. Something being difficult or a lot of work is coming from a place of fear. So if you hear that excuse, the person is in fear. They're afraid of failing. They don't want to look like they don't know something. If it's too hard, if I just use that excuse, oh, I'd start my diet on Monday, but it's too hard. Do you think I really care about starting my diet? No, Because if it was really a priority, I don't care how hard it is, I'm a badass, I'd figure it out. Number 3, I don't know how. Now, this is a pretty rare excuse, but I've seen it used mostly with teenagers and some people that are, again, really afraid to look like failures. But if you're, not knowing how to do something is just not an excuse. It's not. Because there are a lot of things we don't know how to do. Look, I tell my friends all the time, I am only an expert at 1 or 2 things, and I will be the expert at those 1 or 2 things. Meanwhile, I will consult with my other friends who are experts in the other things, so I don't have to be an expert in all the things. But if I want to learn something, if I genuinely am curious and want to do something, the excuse will be, I don't know how to yet. Or can you show me how to do this? That's the difference of somebody who is really paying attention to their self-worth, their self-care, their self-compassion, is when you come at something you don't know how to do, or something that's too hard, or when you're exhausted and you say, I'm exhausted, I don't know how to do this, can you help me? Is there a way to do this more efficiently? That's the difference, because people who really value themselves are going to, when they get in these situations where these excuses tend to come up, they're going to be able to maneuver the situation so that it's more compassionate to themselves. Last but not least, my favorite excuse I hear all the time is, I'm too busy. All right, so I'm too busy. There was an episode I did called The Busy Bus, and I really believe if you tell yourself all the time you're too busy to finish writing that book, or you're too busy to take the EMT test, or you're too busy to try out CrossFit for the first time, or you're too busy to take salsa dancing lessons if it's something you've always wanted to do. Too busy is an excuse that people with poor time management skills use. It's a lazy excuse, and it's so often not true. And when people use that excuse on you to justify why they can't help or be a part of something or socialize or whatever, you have to develop the empathy and the understanding that that just means they don't know how to put themselves first. They don't know how to say no. They probably have shitty boundaries, and they're being pulled every which way by things that aren't even a priority to them, because that's just the way it's been. So if you have someone in your life that's using that excuse over and over and over again, you can develop a little bit more empathy for them and see like, oh, this is probably, the top of the iceberg of a much bigger issue. And it just helps us when we know that we're saying that. Again, you're going to use this time to listen to yourself. When do you say, I don't know, I'm too busy, it's too hard, I'm too tired? When do those excuses come up for you? And now that we're thinking about the excuses we make, let's try to think about how we can restructure those excuses or how we can interact with them differently. So if somebody says to you, I can't, I'm too busy, we can recognize they use the too busy. We recognize that, and we equate it with, they don't have time management skills. So if you want to help them, and we've talked about this before, always ask other friends if they want your advice. When you're talking, we've talked about this a lot. Most people just want to process with you. They just want to tell you what they're thinking. They want to hear themselves out loud. They want to bounce ideas off. But 99.9% of the time, they don't really want your opinion or your advice. So when you feel yourself, you hear them make that excuse, I'm too busy. You've got a good friend and they're like, I want to lose weight. I really want to get into this sexy dress by New Year's. Oh, but I'm just so busy and I can't do it. Your mind should immediately go to, you need help with time management skills. So you ask them, do you want my opinion? Do you want my advice? Or if you find yourself using that excuse all the time, that's when you have to start thinking about time management skills. Now, if you don't have any plan in place at all, and you're just kind of winging it every day, you're going to have increased anxiety and fatigue. There's no way around it. It is so healthy, and it is such good self-care to use some kind of time management system. Now, it doesn't have to be perfect, and you don't have to overhaul your entire schedule or planning tools, but you do have to have some kind of intention